Syria is experiencing a significant upheaval following the ousting of its president, Bashar al-Assad, and we will discuss how your taxpayers have been involved all along. Plus, we have to ask this very important question for Christians. Is biblical prophecy about to come to pass in the ancient city of Damascus? This is your favorite night of the week, The Deep End on Tim Hatch Live. Hey, everybody. Welcome into The Deep End. My name is Tim, and I am so glad that you're here on Tim Hatch Live. And if you are here on YouTube, please click that like button, the notification bell, the subscribe button, all those buttons. It matters. It helps support the channel, and we bring the news of the day through a Christian, actually a pastoral worldview, or a pastoral lens, if you will. Rebel forces led by the HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, have swiftly captured key cities, including Aleppo, Homs, and the capital Damascus in Syria. This rapid offensive has culminated in Assad fleeing the country. In the wake of his departure, some Syrians across the world have taken to the streets in celebration, marking the end of a 50-year Assad regime, if you include his father. And then Israel has started to conduct airstrikes on Damascus and taken over the buffer zone in the Golan Heights to bolster its security amid the unfolding events. Is this a biblical event? We need to discuss that tonight on The Deep End. But before we get there, this content is for educational purposes only. And I look to provide the facts and then some pastoral commentary to go along with them. Yes, Bashar al-Assad, this is him. He has ruled for 24 years in Syria. He has left the country and is again reportedly in Russia. This marks the end of the Assad's regime and begins a period of potential chaos in Syria. The Assad regime goes back to his father, Hafez al-Assad. He ruled Syria from 1971, before I was born, to 2000, and then handed over the reins to his son Bashar. What began as a promising political career led to an authoritarian regime in Syria, including crackdowns on political dissent, limited freedoms, and tight control over the media and its institutions. This led to a civil war starting in 2011 when President Obama was our president. And thus far, over 500,000 people have died under his leadership because of the civil war, and millions have been displaced due to the conflict. I don't know if you remember the images, such as, and fair warning, everybody, the images of children's bodies washing up on the shores of the Mediterranean in Turkey as children were dying, trying to flee for their safety with their families. That picture there made headlines across the globe as it highlighted the outrageous realities of living under Assad's dominion. Assad's forces were accused of war crimes and also used chemical weapons against civilians. Now, despite the regime change, the region remains very unstable. We have no idea, no matter who tells you what, we have no idea what's going to happen in Syria. And this absolutely has everything to do with Israel and the last days. Remember, Israel is going to continue to be surrounded by her enemies until Jesus comes. In fact, there is going to be a global invasion of Israel in the last days. And we need to keep our eyes on Jesus and Israel, because those two have everything to do with God's cosmic timepiece in overseeing these last days events. Now, when you think about Syria, you have to understand, too, that Syria is the home of inordinate Christian persecution. Christians and other minorities are especially vulnerable in the wake of what has happened. Here is Syria. On the map, you see Damascus to the south west. You see Aleppo to the northwest, Aleppo to the northwest. Damascus is a major city of importance. Other than being the capital of Syria, it is a historic biblical city mentioned time and again by the biblical writers. We will get to that in just a moment. But just kind of talking about the offensive that led to Assad's departure, it was led again by the HTS under Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, began on November 27th in northwestern Syria. Rebel forces swiftly advanced, capturing key cities such as Aleppo, Hama, and Homs before reaching Damascus. The rapid collapse of government defenses was attributed to the weakening of Assad's traditional allies, including Russia and Iran, and the severe economic conditions with Syria. That's the AP News reporting. Who are the players in this Syrian civil war that has been happening since 2011? Well, you have Assad's regime, which was backed by Iran and Russia. And then you have the Sunni Islamist groups, which included ISIS and al-Qaeda and Kurdish forces. And then you have Turkey that tries to kind of influence this mess to the north of Syria. And these territories historically are always unpeaceful. They are always fighting each other, and they are always causing inordinate human rights violations. The Assad regime was held up chiefly by Iran and Russia after President Obama of our country, failed to lead in this situation in 2012, 2013. Obama famously warned Assad, called it a red line not to use chemical weapons against his own citizens. And then Assad said, "Stick it, Obama," and used chemical weapons against his citizens. And Obama did nothing. This situation then led to Putin intervening and becoming basically the policeman on the world stage in an embarrassing display exposing President Obama's weakness on the world stage. Now, the real question is, how did this government regime or this regime change? It's not a regime change because there's no regime coming in. It's just chaos right now. How did this Assad departure or overthrow suddenly, and I quote, suddenly happen? It's not sudden. We have to go back to 2013 because your government, United States, is involved here. This is from the Washington Examiner. The headline says, "Syria's sudden uprising is a stark reminder of Obama's failed foreign policy." I already highlighted the failure of Assad to listen to Obama concerning his red line not being crossed and using chemical weapons against his citizens. But this article heightens another reality about the U.S. government back in 2013 when our government began covertly providing arms to anti-Assad rebel forces as early as 2013. The operations were a joint effort with allies in the region such as Jordan and Saudi Arabia aimed at keeping pressure on the Syrian president. CIA coordinated programs such as Timber Sycamore aimed to put weapons furnished by the U.S. government into the hands of the opposition militia that would be fighting for a democratic future in Syria. Many of those weapons were stolen by intermediaries and sold on the black market to terrorist groups. Others made it to their intended recipients, who later jumped to more radical, undemocratic militia. Among those militias that benefited from these American-trained turncoats and their equipment was the al-Nusra Front, an al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria that eventually became HTS, the rebels currently now in control of the country. Amid the chaos, the Islamic State terrorist group seized large swaths of the territory in Syria and built momentum for the jihadist movement. Obama mocked this group in 2014, calling them the JV team of Islamic terrorism. And just a few years later, ISIS would establish a caliphate over 1/3 of Syria and almost half of Iraq, becoming the most belligerent and dangerous terror organizations in the world. Now, when President Trump was elected in 2016, he swiftly defeated ISIS, and you hadn't heard about them since. But now the United States watches with anticipation about the political upheaval taking place in Syria with exasperation and frustration. What about Assad? How come he flees to Moscow? And what does that say about prophecies in Ezekiel about Gog and Magog? Many biblical scholars see Gog and Magog as a picture of an alliance with a Russian leader in the last days that will march from the north into Israel and attack during the tribulation, and who knows what kind of hell will take place as a result. All of these things are, again, reminding us that the Bible is way ahead of the news media in terms of what's going on around the globe. Keep your eyes, again, on Israel, the timepiece, the global timepiece, the cosmic timepiece of God's calendar. So it's kind of interesting, right, to learn that your government, America, funded this regime change. And why now? Why, as the Obama third term comes to an end? Yes, the Obama third term, which some people call the Biden term. It's the Obama third term. It's all of his subsidiaries working in the White House and in the administrative government. Why is this happening now as Obama loses grip on any kind of power in our country, or at least his group, his ilk, loses influence, and Trump now comes back to center stage in the White House? This is not a coincidence. This is part and parcel of the Obama-Biden back Iran and other terrorist groups with your tax money again and again and again. And while there are some Syrians celebrating around the world right now, thinking that the fall of Bashar al-Assad is a sign that they can return to their country, the question is, what kind of country will they return to? Here are some Syrians in Dortmund, Germany, wearing their flags over their shoulders and maybe feeling, again, this is a wonderful event. But I would caution over exuberance in this regard, particularly for Christians in the country. Fellow Christians, listen, Syria is not our friend. There are 10% of the population in Syria is Christian, and we have a video here of how Christians are treated by the Muslim extremists over there, it is not a pretty picture, and we don't have the sound up, but you can imagine that they treat Christians horribly in that country and other surrounding countries. In fact, the only country in the Middle East where Christians have incredible liberties and privilege is the country of Israel, which is why our country is in such a deep alliance with that westernized country. It is the singular democracy in the Middle East, and it is a stronghold for peace. It is a means through which we can accomplish peace, or at least temper the animosity in the area. What does this mean for Israel, speaking of them? And that is a question that must be asked because Syria and Israel have had a contentious relationship for many, many years now. And Israel has done two things. Number one, they have targeted Damascus with bombs. And this is because they now see Assad's overthrow as the end of a 50-year peace deal. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claimed that the fall of Assad regime to rebels was a direct result of his and his country's forceful actions against Hezbollah and Iran, Assad's main supporters. Israel bombed sites within the capital itself, including a security complex and a government research center that it said Iran had previously used to develop weapons. Secondly, Israeli forces have now occupied the Golan Heights kind of DMZ, even though it's not really that. It's not a demilitarized zone. It's a border territory between the two nations. Israeli troops moved in on the heels of this uprising in Syria, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that he ordered the military to seize the demilitarized buffer zone between Israel and Syria to defend villages in Israel's north and warn Syrians in the area to stay home for their safety. This is actually the right move, in my opinion, when it comes to protecting Israel and Israel defending itself. Of course, they are still reeling from the October 7th, 2023 attack and fighting a war with Gaza, but Hezbollah looks all but obliterated at this point. They are stripped of any potential, in my opinion. We'll see how it goes. These things are big moves in Israel's favor. And I do think the scriptures point to this, that you're going to see continued movements toward peace in Israel until a world leader steps onto the stage and starts to negotiate such moves as rebuilding the temple, which there is an undercurrent of that in Israel today, reinstituting the sacrificial system, and so on and so forth. And you can get really deep into the weeds in that. I don't want to do that on this particular episode, but nonetheless, big things happening in Israel. At the same time, alarming things happening in Israel. These are the Islamic terrorists who now occupy Syria. And if you watch this entire video, you will see that they move from praising Allah for their conquest of Damascus and then say they're going to now set their sights on Jerusalem and liberate Gaza because Allah will win. So this is the intention of Islam. All the Islamic countries basically have it in their charter or in their mindset that they are going to destroy Israel. This is, of course, in complete alliance with, I don't want to say alliance, but in cooperation with God's sovereign will over the last days. He will allow Israel to be surrounded by her enemies. He will unify the world against her. He will use this to both judge her unbelief and lead many of them to Jesus Christ. Many of the Israelis are going to come to Christ in the last days. In fact, there's an undercurrent of Christian conversion in Israel right now. And I have been there and I have seen it. So the question we have to ask this tonight is biblical prophecy coming to pass, particularly concerning Damascus? Now, I stipulate on this channel regularly that Islam will be the religiously binding force over the world as the Antichrist steps to the world stage. I believe that. I believe Islam, which has already taken over much of the European continent. I just saw a report a couple of days ago that Muhammad is the number one boy's name in the UK right now for newborn babies. Muhammad. Okay, this is alarming stuff. This is a classically westernized Christian, Judeo-Christian government that has been subtly, without a shot, has been subtly overtaken by Islam. Will that spread to the rest of Europe? I absolutely believe it will. Will it come to America? I do believe at some point it will. Again, the election of President Trump seems to be a reprieve from all of this. We will see, however, over the next 4 years, how it ultimately plays out because nobody can predict the future. But I do think we have to continue to look at Islam as it continues to seek the obliteration of the West, as it continues to seek the obliteration of Israel. And then from that worldwide domination of Islam, you will see the Antichrist arise and be some form of a great uniter. And then you have, interestingly, Assad exiled to Russia, who could be Gog, Magog coming from the north. Not that he would join Putin, but the fact of the matter is that you have friends in the same places who do not like Israel. It really is incredible to see this, to behold prophecies. Go to Ezekiel 38 and 39, read it for yourself. These prophecies coming to pass, these alliances being formed, interestingly, because America fails to lead. And when did America fail to lead? Under, of course, President Obama and this current president, President Joe Biden. Now, whoever it is that invades Israel, that takes the initiative, whether it be Islam, worldwide Islam, or Russia in the north, good news, church, Jesus wins. He's watching, he's waiting, the Father is orchestrating, and Jesus will be sent to obliterate with the breath of his mouth the false prophet, the demonic leader of the world, and will bring about the new Jerusalem and the heavenly kingdom here on this earth. Now, what's interesting again about Damascus is that it's in the Bible. It's the oldest populated city in the world. Very interesting about that. Let me give you some passages that are important to note here. Syria shows up really early in the Bible. So Genesis chapter 10 talks about the fact that Shem is one of Noah's sons. Okay, Shem is the progeny of the Semitic peoples, the children of Abraham. So even the word Semitic comes from the word Shem. And it says in Genesis 10, verse 1, these are the generations of the sons of Noah. Shem, that's where the Jews come from. Ham, that's where the Africans come from. And Japheth, that is where a lot of people believe the Europeans come from. So these are the sons of Noah after the flood. Shem's descendants are listed in Genesis 10:21. It says, to Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the eldest brother of Japheth, children were born. The sons of Shem, Elam, Ashur, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that next one, but Lud and Aram. Aram is important here. That is the modern area of Syria and Mesopotamia. So Aram's descendants gave rise eventually to the Arameans, who spoke Aramaic. Aramaic is a Semitic language that was picked up by the Jews under Babylonian captivity and became the common language of the Jews in their return back to the land and was the language spoken by our Lord and Savior Jesus. He spoke Aramaic. Modern Aram corresponds geographically to the regions that now encompass parts of Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, and Iraq. And in Isaiah 17, verse 1, it says this, an oracle concerning Damascus. Behold, Damascus. This is the same Damascus. Very rarely will you see that, by the way, in the Bible, where it's the same city in the same area. But again, Damascus, the oldest inhabited city in the world, an ancient city that has stayed alive until modern times. You can put Jerusalem in that category as well. But Damascus will cease to be a city and will become a heap of ruins. Thus far, critics of the Bible have argued that since this has not happened and Damascus is still sitting around, then the Bible cannot be reliable because there's Damascus sitting right there. Well, friends, what will you say now? As Damascus looks like it's about to be turned into a heap of ruins by Islamic jihadists. Or maybe they establish a new, anti-Israel regime that's in league with the political left in this country, which that's what I fear is going to happen. But you have to ask yourself, wow, could this be the harbinger of things to come in that region of the world? Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 26 also says, therefore her young men shall fall in her squares, and all her soldiers shall be destroyed in that day, declares the Lord of hosts. And I, God says, I will kindle a fire in the wall of Damascus, and it shall devour the strongholds of Ben-Hadad. Let's talk about Ben-Hadad. Ben-Hadad was the Syrian Aramean leaders who often were allied with Israel's northern kingdoms and kings in their fights with the southern kingdom of Judah. So Syria has always had this kind of strange, quasi-politically friendly and animosity-laden relationship with the northern kingdom of Israel. You'll see that happen on a regular basis through the books of 1st and 2nd Kings. But notice the second part there of this prophecy. God says, I will kindle a fire in the wall of Damascus. What is a wall made of? It's made of bricks. What is a brick made of? Sand. How do you cause sand to catch fire? The only answer that we know now scientifically is atomic bombs. Atomic nuclear energy can burn bricks, melt bricks down to their core. Maybe this happens in the tribulation. Maybe what we see here is when Islam is dominant over the world and, pointing their guns at Israel, and God steps in and stops it all, brings about the kingdom of heaven on this earth. Does that happen in the tribulation through what we read about in Revelation as this thorough destruction of the rivers, the seas, the land, the crops, right? Does that happen through nuclear fallout, nuclear warfare? Very, very possible. And so what you see here in Syria, the news of Syria is worth covering from a biblical mindset because it does have everything to do with Scripture and the fulfillment of Scripture in the last days. Exciting and alarming. Again, these are not days to be lax in the days that go in your faith. These are not days to sit idly by and somewhat passively attend a church and be engaged in Christian faith. No, these are the days to be awake, to be alert, to look for the signs, as Jesus told us in the Scriptures regularly in Matthew's gospel, in Luke's gospel, and in Mark's gospel. He is looking for faith when he returns. Will he find it? Matthew 25, will he find 10 virgins sleeping and 5 virgins sleeping and 5 virgins ready? I see this playing out right now in our day. So many Americans are asleep at the wheel. So many Christians are asleep on the watch as we see our government, America's government, go to work to make these things kind of come to pass. Of course, at the behest of God's sovereign control over the nations. Some people say, how can you say that God's in control here when there's war and devastation, disease and death? God always leverages those things. Look at the Old Testament. He does that time and time again. He does that throughout the eons and eras of world history. He raises up kings and deposes kings. And he will accomplish his divine purposes on the earth, and he will always protect his own. And yes, sometimes God's protection of his own results in the death of his own. Because if you're a believer, friend, death is not the end. Death is actually the ultimate protection. Nothing on this world can touch you anymore. Now you are forever, always in the presence of the Most High God, enjoying the sweetness of heaven and soon the kingdom that is to come upon this earth. But there's a second track that I want to take tonight, and that is the fact that your tax dollars are at work here. This is the shtick that our government has been playing for decades in the Middle East and in Ukraine presently and in Central America. There is little question in my mind that Donald Trump's win upended the apple cart at the CIA, at the FBI, and this could very much be an incursion by special forces paid for by our tax dollars to establish a regime the political left could puppet along forwardly in the region. America has funded a lot of these hostilities around the world. Iran gets money from the Obama and Biden regimes and then gives that money to Hezbollah and Hamas. We know this. I've talked about this on this channel before. Then America funds the defenses necessary to fight against Hezbollah and Hamas. In Syria, again, in June 2023, the U.S. gave almost $1 billion in humanitarian aid. $1 billion of your tax dollars went to Syria in June 2023. Did you hear about it? You probably didn't hear about it because, again, too many Americans are neck deep in TikTok to care about what's really going on in their country. And somebody puts this meme is all over the internet. It's funny. My tax dollars are funding the Iron Dome in Israel, but somehow my tax dollars are also going to Hezbollah, which is funded by Iran, and Iran is funded by the Obama-Biden regime. That's the game that this country has been playing. America blows away the competition, by the way, when it comes to foreign aid. Again, this term foreign aid should be met with an asterisk because it's not foreign aid. It's actually the military-industrial complex making bank by funding these wars and incursions around the world. I'll put up this graph. Look at the United States contribution to humanitarian, again, quote unquote, aid worldwide in 2023 alone, in millions of US dollars, that's 9.4 billion American dollars in 2023 went to humanitarian aid in other countries. And much of that aid has funded extremist regimes. The second closest, the European Commission, at 2.1 billion, and Germany at 2 billion. So our money, your money, is going to fund all of these things. And the question has to be asked, where's the payback? What do we get out of it? The answer is we don't get anything out of it. The answer is the CEOs of weapons manufacturer companies get a lot out of it. And the money just keeps flowing in. And I don't know if you've ever heard about this, but we did some research. We found out in 2022, pallets of American cash were delivered to the Taliban, which took control of Afghanistan after our disastrous withdrawal in 2021, one of Joe Biden's most alarming failures. Millions of dollars were sent by the feds to the Taliban in 2021. 11 million since 2021. This is from 6 months ago. Another report said 40 million were sent to the Taliban. Later, this is not on the screen in this article, but it says that the terrorist group returned to power in 2021, and Afghanistan's education sector has been funded by America at the cost of $185 million, even though the Taliban has issued decrees drastically limiting access to education for girls and women, as well as restricting women's ability to work and other basic freedoms. So our country funds their education system that actually suppresses women and young girls in that system. It's like, wake up, America. This is what your country has been doing for the last 12 out of the 16 years. And this is why Trump's election was so important, to stem the tide of this absolute nonsense. And you say, well, this is just right-wing talking points. Okay, let me give you a headline from the LA Times, not particularly a right-wing bastion of information. Here's the title of the article. In Syria, militias armed by the Pentagon fight those armed by the CIA. Let me just read some of this article. U.S. war machine have begun to fight each other on the plains between the besieged city of Aleppo and the Turkish border. Remember, that's in the northwest of the country of Syria, highlighting how little control U.S. intelligence officers and military planners have over the groups they have financed and trained in the bitter 5-year-old civil war. The fighting has intensified over the last 2 months as CIA-armed units and Pentagon-armed ones have repeatedly shot at each other while maneuvering through contested territory on the northern outskirts of Aleppo. U.S. officials and rebel leaders have confirmed. So we have our tax dollars funding this Syrian incursion and the civil war, and then going to the Taliban in Afghanistan, all in the name of what? Seriously, tell me what we are doing. We are lining the pockets of the military-industrial complex. We are lining the pockets of Halliburton and other corporations that make money by making sure the world is at unrest. I love this meme that I ran across on the internet. Once weapons were manufactured to fight wars, now wars are manufactured to sell weapons. Or in the case of Dr. Evil, from now on, money laundering will be called foreign aid. I could just see Dr. Evil saying it just like that. That's where we are as a country. So here's what Trump has had to say. Trump says U.S. should stay out of fighting in Syria as the opposition's forces gain. Quote, Syria is a mess, but it's not our friend, and the United States should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved, he wrote in a post on Truth Social on Saturday. How about that? I like that idea. How about we don't use taxpayer money to fund rebels in Syria and the Taliban in Afghanistan? How about the political left wake up to the human rights violations? You're all upset about the human rights violations in Gaza. How about the human rights violations in Iraq? How about the human rights violations in Syria? How about the human rights violations in Lebanon? Do you care? Or do you only care about the ones that are happening in the name of Zionism? You see, that's the problem with the political discourse in our country. Uninformed young people in our country latch onto anti-Semitic vibes that they get from their professors, these junkies from the 70s and 80s who were high on marijuana at Woodstock and couldn't make it in the corporate world, so they went to teach the young people in the educational sector and now have indoctrinated them into anti-Israel sentiments. That's where we are as a country. And at the end of the day, lives are lost in these countries. People are put to death. Christians suffer persecution. and billionaire weapons manufacturers profit in the end. I say this with great alarm. I do believe that America is the Babylon of Revelation 17 and 18. The great Babylon, the whore that seduces the nations, that sells her wares to the nations, that profits of the nations, and lives in luxury and glorifies herself. And God brings her down in a single hour. Where's the outrage, by the way? Where's the outrage by the American? The average American should say, hey, wait a second. This is not what I signed up for. This is not what I want my country to do. I love this meme. Somebody's put this up there. 1776, pay a 3% tax on tea and paper, and we get a revolution. 2023, pay 40% of your income to the federal government, and you're just like, yeah, sure, that's fine. What's on TV tonight? And speaking of funding, endless humanitarian aid causes around the world, President Biden went to Angola to announce that he was going to send $1 billion in American money in the name of humanitarian aid. Listen.
You know, that's the right thing for the wealthiest nation in the world to do. And today, I'm announcing over $1 billion in new humanitarian support for Africans displaced from homes by historic droughts and food insecurity. We know African leaders and citizens are seeking more than just aid. You seek investment. So the United States is expanding our relationship all across Africa, from assistance to aid, to investment to trade, moving from patrons to partners to help bridge the infrastructure gap. I was told, by the way, when I got elected, I could never get an infrastructure bill passed.
He always makes it about himself, doesn't he? And this is just infuriating for anyone who has still been paying attention to the news in North Carolina, South Carolina, these areas ravaged by the effects from Hurricane Helene. You have to ask yourself this question: where on earth is that $1 billion for American citizens? You should be outraged. These are your tax dollars at work. Another example of taxpayer money being spent and wasted at the very local level. How about students being offered a Satan club at an elementary school in the state of Ohio? I kid you not. Marysville School, Ohio. Watch this.
All new tonight at 6, a new program is causing outrage at a local school district. The Hellion Academy of Independent Learning, or HAIL. The Satanic Temple is putting on the class. Tonight, 10 TV's Tara Jabor breaks down what this class is and why it's being offered.
Tonight, a district policy is under scrutiny after a Satanic Temple group is offering classes to students at Edgewood Elementary School in Marysville. The program, Hellion Academy of Independent Learning, or HAIL, will fall under the district's release time for religious instruction policy. That means kids can take time out of their school day to participate.
At first, I thought it was kind of a joke.
Crystal Dilly has 3 kids in the district. She says she doesn't support religious instruction affiliated with school.
Honestly, I would prefer that it be separated. I don't think that either one have any business being in school.
Betty Ellswick is one of the organizers of the program and a parent. She says the program is not about teaching kids about Satanism.
Kids have a place to go, and it is not teaching about Satanism.
Ellswick says the program is coming to the district in part because of LifeWise Academy, another religious program being offered.
With this policy in place, that we also wanted to have the kids have representation, no matter what group was here.
Can you tell us more about why you all are trying to bring this, or are bringing this to the school district?
Well, we wanted to make sure that the kids have an ability to participate in a program that was positive for them.
Still, parents like Dilly say the satanic symbols give her and possible children the wrong impression of what is being taught.
Whether it be LifeWise or this HAIL Academy, they're not being fully vetted by the school.
We reached out to LifeWise Academy, and CEO Joel Penton said in part, quote, "We believe all families should have the opportunity to choose religious study during school hours, and we trust parents to make the best choice for their children," end quote.
Now, this program will begin in December. They say it'll happen once a month on Wednesdays. Reporting in Marysville, Tara Jabor, 10 TV News.
So there you go. There you have it. We have Satan clubs being offered in elementary schools in Ohio, and that is, again, another picture of taxpayer money being wasted. Now, here is an interesting, perhaps, observation as a pastor who is very familiar with the scriptures This sort of showdown has happened before, and you need to pay attention. For everyone who ever freaks out about these kind of things, and we tend to overreact as Christians to these kind of offerings, and we also overreact when our Congress or some city council asks some Hindu to show up and pray in their Hindi prayers, or some Islamics to show up and pray prayers to Allah for the government and all that kind of stuff. And we kind of freak out and we get all alarmed. But let me suggest that we just turn to our Bibles and ask ourselves, has this showdown ever happened before? And the answer is resoundingly yes. Let me just put this up on the screen for you because this is kind of important for us to pay attention. Here is a showdown that happened in where? 1 Kings chapter 18, Elijah confronted Ahab. Ahab instituted in the nation of Israel, the northern kingdom, Baal worship. Baal was the Lord of the Flies, the god that the pagan nations turned to for fertility and blessing. And Elijah goes into hiding for 3.5 years as a famine comes upon the land, and then the people of Israel are hunting him down at the behest of at the behest of Ahab. Elijah comes out of hiding and then sends the challenge out. Let's show up at Mount Carmel. You and your 450 prophets of Baal pray to your God. I, the lone prophet of the Lord, will pray to the Lord Yahweh, and the God who answers by fire. He is the God. He is the true God. And we all know this story. There it is in verse 24 of 1 Kings 18. And Elijah just challenged them. Here's my suggestion. Instead of freaking out, why don't we challenge people? Why don't we suggest, okay, you call on your useless dead God. You call on Satan and see how your life goes. We're going to call on our Lord, and we're going to see how our life goes. Oh, and by the way, we're going to pray for you too. So if we both go well, just know it's our Lord. These things should not alarm us. These are the things that are going to continue to happen as people who are grumpy about Christianity continue to, needle us and try to upset us. We don't need to be upset. We serve the true and living God. We serve the God who wins. And we at the same time should be very alarmed, moreover, about how our government is handling itself, because they represent us, representative government still. Which brings you to the news out of the New York Post. Top Doge, or dog, Elon Musk, and the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, have called out the fact that only 6% of federal workers are showing up in person on a full-time basis. They say it's absurd. Yeah, you think? 6% of the workforce in our federal government shows up. This is after the pandemic has long been over. The pandemic has long been over. Mike Johnson has called on Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to tackle this issue. Let's see if they do, hoping for significant change. By the way, the article goes on and says President Biden is setting the example here. He was out of the office 532 days over the last 3.5 years. About 40% of the time, Biden was not around Washington. And then the article also highlights the top 10 emptiest government headquarters, according to the Public Buildings Reform Board. Top of the list, Department of Energy. That's kind of an important department, isn't it? Aren't we supposed to be, running our cars, powering our homes, finding new ways to do so with renewable energy, yet zero? Approximate utilization of the square footage of the space per occupant is 0% for the Department of Energy. Down on the list, Department of Agriculture. No wonder why we're fat and unhealthy, because the Department of Agriculture is not showing up for work. Department of Veterans Affairs. Well, sure, we can throw $1 billion over there in Angola, but our veterans get this shtick every single day by our government. The EPA, 8%. The Department of Commerce, 11%. Housing and Urban Development, how are our cities being run? 11%. So this is government at work. This is government doing what it does. And this is why you need to do something that I challenge my church to do this Sunday. Pay attention to your tax bracket. I don't even think you understand how much you pay in federal taxes. And never mind local state taxes. Never mind your property tax or your sales tax. Let's just start with how much money the federal government takes out of your paycheck automatically. Let me put this up on the screen. This is the federal tax rates for 2024. The poor pay 10%. The poor pay 10%. And I just want to challenge anybody who has a problem with tithing. And you say, well, poor people shouldn't do it. Well, the government doesn't feel that way. The government says, absolutely, you're going to give us 10%. And we're going to take it by force. You're not even going to see it. We're going to withhold it. And then you're not going to give a check anymore in the mail for your work. You're going to get direct deposited. So you'll never really actually look at those numbers of how much money the government takes out of your account. Then notice the second bracket, 12% for those married filing jointly up to $94,300. Then 22% for those making up to $200,000. 24% there for up to $383,000. 32% for those making $383,901 or more. And then there's even higher brackets for the uber rich, I guess you would call them. Just notice the 10% difference here between the 12% taxable rate for those making $94,300 and lower, and those making $201,051 and more. That's a 10% difference. If you're at the high end, if you're near that $201,000, you're going to be paying an extraordinary amount of taxes that you may not have to. And I challenge my church this. You have to look at, I challenge my church with this. You have to look at your standard deduction amount. For single people, it's $14,600. For married, it's $29,200. By the way, $29,200 standardized deduction, which means you pay taxes on $29,200 less than your pay if you're married filing jointly, or $14,600 less than you make. You're paying taxes on that. That deduction was elevated by the Trump tax cuts. Remember when they told you that the Trump tax cuts were tax cuts for the uber rich and the billionaires? No, it was a tax cut for every single American. These are the facts. Check them out for yourself. Okay, the standardized deduction under Obama was around $12,000 for those married filing jointly. Under Trump's tax cuts, it became $29,200. You're paying less taxes federally because of Donald Trump. Those tax cuts were scheduled, or are still scheduled, to expire in 2025. Kamala Harris wanted to allow them to expire and come up with a new tax plan, although she would be very vague in what kind of tax plan she was offering. But here's the strategy that I want to suggest, and listen to me closely. This is not technically financial advice. Check it out with your accountant. But here's the suggestion. If you are close to, let me see if I can get the pointer over here. Can you see my pointer? Where are you? Where are you, pointer? It's not there. Okay, you know what? I can do this. If you are close to this number, 201,000, or this number, 383,000, married filing jointly, or let's go over to the single brackets and say if you're a $100,000 paycheck a year, or you're at around the $200,000 income, you could potentially do something to really stick it to the federal government. And I want you to think about it, what you can do. You can give your way to a lower tax bracket, which makes your taxable hit potentially 10% lower. Imagine saving 10% of taxes. Imagine if you make $191,000 as a single person. And again, you had to add $29,000, or sorry, in the case of a single person, you had to add $14,000 for the standardized deduction. So if you make around $210,000, you could give your way into the lower tax bracket of 24% or 22%. No, really, it's to say with 24%. And you could save those taxes and give them to your church or a gospel-centered charity of your choice instead of the federal government. You would actually lose nothing. It would just be about which funnel do you want it to go into? Do you want it to go into the gospel, or do you want it to go into the government? And I want you to think about it. I really want you to examine this. Check it out with your accountant. Find out where you're going to land on this chart. Ask them these questions yourself. Again, I'm not talking about if you just give money, you're going to get that money back because you stay in the same tax rate. You have to give in such a way that you might be hovering around one of those tax bracket borders, and you can give your way into a lower tax bracket, and you're not actually losing anything. That's the big point that I want to make here. You're not actually losing anything. You're just redirecting where the money that was going to be gone from your pocket actually goes. Or maybe it's already gone because of federal withholding on your paycheck, and now it comes back to you in a refund that you can give to your church, or you don't have to pay extra if you haven't withheld enough. Huge opportunities here that I think are worth paying attention to. Again, not official financial advice. I am not a tax accountant. I am a pastor. but I challenge my church to think about this at the end of the year, and I want to challenge you to do this. Because if we could possibly give less money to the government and more money to the gospel, good things could happen. Because we need a church that preaches the truth of Jesus Christ now in this age. Amen, somebody. And that brings me to...
ridiculous.
Let's get ridiculous.
Okay, here is some ridiculous news. I was shocked to find this out. Baby Jesus in Keffiyeh, Keffiyeh, was unveiled in the Vatican Nativity. Bethlehem artists' Christmas display in St. Peter's Square featured Palestinian symbolism amid Pope Francis's calls for peace in the Holy Land. I am utterly shocked by this news story. A nativity scene featuring baby Jesus wrapped in a keffiyeh was unveiled at Pope Francis' nativity scene and Christmas tree inauguration on Saturday in St. Peter's Square. The piece, titled Nativity in Bethlehem 2024, was designed by two artists from Bethlehem. The main structure is nearly 10 feet tall and has shelves showing various nativity scenes. At the unveiling, Pope Francis stated that the scene served as a reminder of those who suffered the tragedy of war in the Holy Land and other parts of the world, end quote. Enough with wars, enough with violence, he said before once again condemning the arms industry that thrives on war and death. Okay, but ask yourself, Pope Francis, who started the war? Who? Who is ardently opposed to God's people, the people of Israel, from whom we get Christ, from whom we get the commandments, the promises, the covenants? I really question the Pope's commitment to the scriptures, to Israel, to Jesus himself. Jesus was not a Palestinian. Anytime anybody says Jesus was a Palestinian, ignore them. He was a Jew. He lived in a land of Judaism, Israel. He followed Judaism. He followed the law. He obeyed the scriptures. One thing about religious leaders is we often speak about political issues without having done our research. I do my absolute best not to do that here on this channel. I want to bring facts to bear on society's problems, so I don't just spout off of the mouth and say you should listen to me because I'm a pastor. No, I say these things because they are truth, and we've checked them out, and they are facts, and you have to be aware of the times in which we live. Do not be ignorant. We have no more time for ignorance in this country as Christians. Okay, that's the show. We got plenty more in the extra content coming up right now. To be part of that, you've got to subscribe to the membership plan. $10 to $60 a month. Any amount will get you access to the extra content that begins right now. When you support us, I want to remind you that we support Project Rescue and the American Bible Society. And that is the show. I hope to see all of you subscribers on the extra content that will start right now. God bless.